No woman could survive the Alpha King's curse, until the maid fell into his arms and changed everything. Everyone in the Voss house knew about the curse. They called it that quietly, between themselves, in the kitchen when the pots were boiling loud enough to cover the sound of their voices. They never called it a curse out loud, not where Mr. Voss could hear, because Mr. Voss did not believe in such things, and he would not have reacted well to the word. But that is what it was, or at least, that is what it felt like. 3 assistants, 2 housekeepers, 1 woman he had dated for 8 months, the longest anyone had lasted. All of them gone. All of them left without a word that made proper sense. The first assistant said she needed a change. The second said the commute was too long. The third said nothing at all. She left a folded note on the counter that said only, "I'm sorry," and that was that. The housekeeper before Nadia, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Fenton, who had worked in large estates all her life and prided herself on never being rattled, left after 6 weeks. She did not give a reason. She simply appeared one morning with her coat on, put her keys on the kitchen table, and walked out while the breakfast eggs were still on the stove. So when Nadia Osei arrived at the Voss estate on a gray Tuesday morning with 1 small bag and her whole life needing the income, she already knew the story. Her agency contact had told her, a neighbor of the estate, an older woman who happened to be standing by her gate when Nadia walked up the driveway, had told her again, unprompted, with the particular relish of someone who considers themselves a public service. "They all leave," the neighbor said, like that was helpful information, like that was going to stop Nadia from walking through the gate. "No one lasts longer than 2 months. The last girl looked fine when she arrived and looked like a different person entirely when she left." "Thank you," Nadia said politely, and she walked through the gate, because the thing people with the luxury of opinions do not always understand is that some people need the job more than they need the warning. Nadia was 24 years old. She had a mother who had cleaned other people's floors her whole life, and a little sister in school whose fees did not care whether Nadia was nervous or not. She had rent due in 18 days. She had a degree that was currently doing nothing useful in a folder on her desk, back in her flat. She needed the job. So she walked through the gate, knocked on the side door as she had been instructed, and stood there in her pressed black uniform, waiting for someone to let her in. What she did not expect was for someone to let her in and then immediately get out of her way, as if she were a weather system they were trying not to get caught in. The deputy housekeeper, a thin man called Remy who had the energy of a person who had been mildly alarmed for several years running, showed her the kitchen, the supply closets, the schedule board, the linen arrangement, and the list of rules for the house in approximately 12 minutes. He spoke the way people speak when they are trying to finish speaking as fast as possible. "The East Wing," he said, slowing only on this, "is off limits after 9 in the evening. Do not go there. Do not ask about it. Do not clean it, unless you are specifically told. The room at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor is always locked. It stays locked. If you hear sounds from it, continue what you are doing." Nadia looked at him. "What kind of sounds?" Remy looked at the schedule board. "The breakfast routine starts at 6:45, he said. "Any questions?" She had exactly 1 question, and he had just refused to answer it. So she nodded, said she understood, and that was the beginning of Nadia's time at the Voss estate. She did not meet Mr. Voss on that first day. She met him on the 2nd day, and the way it happened was not dignified for either of them. It was early. 6:50 in the morning. She was carrying a tray, the full breakfast tray, coffee pot, orange juice, a covered plate, a folded newspaper, moving faster than she probably should have been because she was running 3 minutes behind the schedule that Remy had emphasized with the gravity of a military briefing. She came around the corner of the main hallway with the tray out in front of her and the efficiency of someone who had done this route twice in training the previous day and thought she had it memorized. She had not accounted for someone coming from the opposite direction. She hit him like hitting a wall. The tray went. The coffee pot went. The orange juice, which she had filled slightly too full, went spectacularly. The newspaper separated into its sections mid-air, which was almost impressive. Nadia herself grabbed for the tray, missed, and went sideways into the wall with her elbow. She stood there. The floor was coffee. The wall behind her had orange juice on it. The newspaper was everywhere. And then she looked up. The wall was warm. The wall had arms. The wall was looking down at her with an expression she could not immediately read, somewhere between surprised and something else that was harder to name. Dark eyes. A jaw that looked like someone had drawn it with a ruler. He was holding the coffee pot, which he had somehow caught before it hit the ground, and the coffee was all over the front of his shirt, which was white, which made the whole situation extremely clear and extremely bad. Nadia's brain made a sound like a dial-up connection. She started. It's fine, he said. His voice was low and even, which was not what she had expected from a man with coffee all over his white shirt at 10 to 7 in the morning. I'm so sorry. The schedule, I was trying to be on time, and I went too fast around the corner, and I couldn't see. It's fine, he said again. She stopped talking. She was on her knees picking up newspaper sections. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she told them to stop, which they ignored. He set the coffee pot down on the floor next to her, very carefully, as if it were a normal thing to do, and then he crouched down and began picking up newspaper sections too. She looked at him. He was crouching on the floor of his own hallway picking up his own newspaper that she had scattered all over his own floor, and he was doing it without any expression she could interpret, and she had no framework for this. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. He kept doing it. They picked up the newspaper in silence. When they were done, he stood, handed her the sections, and looked at her for a moment. There was something in his face that she could not read, something that moved through it briefly and then closed, like a door swinging open for a second and then pulled shut. Try to watch the corners, he said, and he walked away. She stood in the middle of the coffee-soaked hallway, holding a wet newspaper and the empty tray, and she thought, that was Cale Voss. That was the man the whole house called a curse. She learned the shape of him slowly, the way you learn a house, by moving through it every day and slowly understanding which doors stick, which floorboards make a sound, which rooms carry cold air regardless of the season. He woke early, always before 6. He drank his coffee black with no sugar, which she confirmed from the cup he left in the study, and he did not eat breakfast in the conventional sense. He ate standing in the kitchen sometimes, or not at all, and the covered breakfast plate she delivered every morning was often barely touched when she collected it. He worked. That was the main fact of him. He worked constantly, the way people work when they are using it for something other than productivity. She could see the lights in the study until past midnight when she was doing her last round of the house. She could hear the sound of his voice on calls through the closed door, low and measured, never raised. The staff gave her the fuller picture over the first 2 weeks. They did it carefully, in pieces, the way people share information about something that is still happening. Remy told her about the accident. 3 years ago. A car, a wet road, a night that ended with Cale in hospital, and his younger brother not making it out. He said it the way people say things they have rehearsed saying, so as not to feel it too much. Quickly, with the specific economy of someone who needs to get through the sentence before the weight of it lands. He had a jaw injury, Remy said, not looking at her. Still causes him pain sometimes. You might notice he doesn't eat certain things. She filed that away without comment. One of the kitchen staff, a woman named Adaise, who had been there longer than anyone and watched everything with the precise, affectionate attention of someone who genuinely cared about the people she worked around, filled in the rest. The brother had been younger by 6 years. Funny, she said, the kind of funny that makes a room better just by being in it. He and Mr. Voss had been close in the way that siblings are close when one of them is the kind of person who makes the other one remember to be a person. He was the warm one, Adaise said simply. Mr. Voss was always serious, but when his brother was here, it was different. The house was different. And the East Wing? Nadia asked. She asked it carefully, the way you ask something you already suspect is connected to something else. Adaise looked at her. The brother was building something there. Before the accident, a recording studio. They never finished it. Nadia thought about the sounds she had heard on her 4th night, passing the East Wing after dinner when she was carrying laundry up. A sound she had put down to something structural, something the house was doing. But it had not sounded like a house. It had sounded like a person in a room, talking to themselves in the dark. She did not go back to that corridor after 9. Not because she was afraid of what she would find, but because some things are not hers to intrude on. She left his coffee outside the east wing door the next morning. Just the coffee. No tray. No note. She set it on the floor outside the door at 6:30 and went back downstairs. It was gone when she came back up at 8. She did not mention it. He did not mention it. But the next day she did it again, and the day after that, and by the end of the week it had become a thing she simply did. The way you make a small adjustment to a room to make it work better, and then forget you made the adjustment because now it just works. She had been there 3 weeks when she understood that what she had been warned about was not cruelty. The women who had left before her, she thought about them. She had built a version of him in her head from their departures, a man who was cold or cutting or unbearable to be around in some active way. But the longer she was in the house, the more she understood that it was not any of those things. It was vacancy. He moved through the house like someone who had forgotten what houses were for, like the rooms were obstacles between one working hour and the next, rather than spaces where a life was supposed to happen. He ate alone, he worked alone, he took phone calls and spoke to colleagues and handled the business of a large company with the kind of focused, impressive precision that must have made him excellent at it, and then he put the phone down and went silent again. He was not unkind, he was just not there, or mostly not there, there and then not, like a radio signal you pick up briefly and then lose. She understood now why they left, not because he made them want to go, because staying felt like talking to a door that would never open, and eventually people run out of the particular kind of patience that requires. She was not sure she had that kind of patience either, but she had rent due and a sister in school, and she was not operating on the same equation as someone who could afford to leave. She kept doing her job. She cleaned the rooms he used. She kept the kitchen the way Adeze had taught her. She left his coffee at the east wing door, and picked up the empty cup later without comment. She watched the corners in the hallways. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she would come around a corner and he would be there, coming from the other direction, and they would both slow down, and there would be a moment of something that she could not name. Not awkward, not warm, something in between, like a word she didn't know in a language she was just starting to learn. He corrected the angle of the window shades once. She had pulled them to what she thought was the right position, and she came back into the room to find them moved by about 3 centimeters. She moved them back, he moved them again. She moved them back and said nothing, and waited, and he moved them a third time and said, without turning around, "The light hits the desk differently." "I can see that," she said, "but it's worse for the reading chair." Silence. "There is no one sitting in the reading chair," he said. "There could be," she said. He looked at her. It was a quick look, the kind that happens before a person decides how to respond, and in it, she saw something she had not seen before, something that might have been amusement, buried under several other things, but briefly there. He moved the shade to a position that was neither hers nor his, split the difference without acknowledging that that was what he was doing, and left the room. She looked at the shade in its compromised position for a moment. Then she went back to work. She had a habit of reading in the kitchen after her shift. She was not supposed to, technically. The house had staff quarters with a common room, and that was where she was supposed to spend her off hours. But the common room had a television that one of the junior staff left on at high volume, and Nadia needed quiet the way some people need water. The kitchen was quiet after 9. It smelled of whatever Adeze had been cooking, and it was warm, and there was a long wooden table near the window where the light was good. She would sit there with a book and her own cup of tea and an hour of silence, and then go to bed. The book was from his library. She had borrowed it without asking because it was on a shelf near the kitchen corridor, and it had a broken spine from being opened so many times, and she had wanted to read it for 2 years, and had never had the money to buy a copy. She had told herself she would put it back before he noticed. He noticed. She looked up one night at the sound of footsteps, and he was standing in the kitchen doorway in the way he sometimes appeared, without announcement, without much in the way of expression, just standing there, looking at the book. That's from my personal collection, he said. I know, I was going to return it. She paused. I'm returning it when I'm done. When will you be done? Probably 2 more nights. He was quiet. He looked at the cover of the book, then at her. You dog-ear pages? Never, she said, with the particular offense of someone for whom this is a point of genuine principle. He looked at the book again. Then he walked to the other end of the table and sat down. He had his phone. He looked at his phone. She looked at her book. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked. Neither of them spoke for an hour. When she got up to go, she marked her page with a receipt from her coat pocket, pulled her cardigan straight, and tucked the book under her arm. The ending is disappointing, he said, without looking up from his phone. She paused in the doorway. I know. I've read it before. She left. He stayed in the kitchen for another 23 minutes. She found out only because she came back down for her phone, which she had left on the counter, and saw the kitchen light still on. She did not go in. She stood in the corridor for a moment, and then went back upstairs. She told herself it did not mean anything, but she thought about it the next day while she was cleaning, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, not sure what you are looking for. The charity event was announced 3 days before it happened, which Adeyeze said was completely typical. He doesn't like them, Adeyeze said, moving around the kitchen with the focused energy of someone who was already 3 planning stages ahead. He does 2 a year because the company requires it. He books them as late as possible so he has as little time to think about them as possible. Last year he only told us 4 days in advance. Is he worse than usual when they happen? Nadia asked. Adeyeze looked at her. He is exactly what he always is. That is the thing. He doesn't get worse. The house gets more full, and there's more of him to have to be around more people. Nadia understood this in the abstract. By the night of the event, she understood it much more specifically. He moved through his own house, like someone counting down to when it would be empty again. She watched him from across the room while she was managing the service trays, watched him do the handshakes, and the brief conversations, and the expressions that looked like the shape of warmth, without quite being warm, and she thought, this is exactly what exhausted looks like when a person is very good at hiding it. His jaw was tight. She noticed that. She had noticed over the weeks that his jaw was the thing that gave him away when he was in pain, a particular quality of stillness on the left side of his face that was different from his usual stillness. The noise of the event was getting to him, or the lights were, or both. She minded her work. That was not her observation to make, and even if it was, there was nothing she could do with it. She was coming back from the garden doors with an empty tray when she heard a voice she did not like. It was a man, older, the particular looseness of someone who had consumed enough wine to feel invincible about his own opinions. He was talking to her with the specific confidence of someone who was used to not being interrupted, his hand on her arm in the way people put their hands on things they believe belong to them. She had the tray. She had a response forming. She was 3 seconds from using both of them. Then Kale was there. He appeared beside her the way he always appeared, without announcement, without drama. He simply stepped between her and the man with the particular quality of someone who is very large and very still and completely uninterested in the possibility of being moved. He looked at the man. He did not raise his voice. He spoke 3 sentences, calm and precise and final, the way you close a door. The man left. Nadia stood there. She was angry. That was the thing that surprised her. Not that it happened, not even that he had stepped in, but the anger, hot and fast and coming from somewhere underneath the surface of the evening, from some older, tireder place. I could have handled that, she said. I know, he said. Then why? Because you shouldn't have to. She looked at him. The event noise was everywhere around them, people and glasses and music, and he was standing there with his jaw tight and his white dress shirt perfect, and looking at her like he was waiting for her to say something. She did not say anything. She picked up her tray and walked back into the event, and she did not think about it for the rest of the night, because she was working, and when she went to bed she thought about it for a long time. Because you shouldn't have to. Not, I was protecting my staff. Not, I was handling a guest who was causing a problem. Not any of the professional distanced reasons that would have made it easier. Because you shouldn't have to. That was a different sentence entirely. She wrote the resignation letter the next morning. She sat at the little desk in her staff room with a piece of paper she had taken from the supply closet, and she wrote it in the plain, honest way she had been taught. Grateful for the opportunity, circumstances requiring a change, professional regards. She folded it. She walked down the hall. She slid it under his office door before 6 in the morning, before he was up, so that she would not have to do it in front of him. Then she went to the kitchen to start the breakfast routine. He appeared at 6. She knew it was him by the sound, the particular quality of his footsteps, which she had learned the way you learn sounds in a house you have been living in. He came into the kitchen. He was holding the letter. "No," he said. She did not look up from the coffee she was measuring. "That is not how resignation works. I'm aware. I gave the required notice. 2 weeks. I don't want 2 weeks. She stopped. She set down the coffee measure. She turned around. He was standing on the other side of the kitchen counter, the letter in his hand, and he looked. She had no good word for it. He looked like a man who had just arrived at the edge of something and was not sure what to do about the drop. "Mr. Voss. Kale." The word landed in the space between them and sat there. She had never heard him say his own name. Not once. Not in all the weeks. He spoke about himself in the third person on professional calls, referring to himself by surname when necessary, and otherwise not at all. She had heard his name from others but never from him, and now he had said it, given it to her like something being handed across a counter. "Kale," she said, "because there was nothing else to do with it. I am leaving because it is the right thing to do." "Right for who?" She did not answer. She turned back to the coffee. She could feel him still there. "Stay 1 more week," he said. "After that, if you still want to go." He stopped. He did not finish the sentence. He put the letter on the counter between them, and he picked up the coffee cup she had just poured, and he walked out of the kitchen. She stood there. The letter sat on the counter. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about what she had told herself the night before, that she was leaving before she became one more woman in the story of his curse, before she became someone who got close and then left. She was going to leave on her own terms, before it became something else. But the sentence kept running in the back of her head. "After that, if you still want to go." He had not said she couldn't leave. He had not argued. He had not made any of the professional, practical cases that might have been easier to refuse. He had said 1 more week, and left the sentence open, and trusted her to do whatever she would do with it. She did not pick up the letter. She finished making breakfast. He opened the east wing on a Wednesday afternoon. She was upstairs doing the second-floor bedrooms, moving through the guest rooms with the automatic efficiency of someone whose hands know what to do without consulting the rest of them. She heard the door at the end of the corridor open, not forced, not dramatic, the simple sound of a door being opened. She slowed. She finished the room she was in. She folded the last towel. She told herself she was going back downstairs. She went to the east wing instead. The door at the end was open. She stopped in the doorway. It was a recording studio, or the beginning of one, equipment in various stages of installation, a soundproofed wall half completed, cables organized in bundles along the floor, a large console in the center that looked like it had been set up and then simply stopped. Everything dusty, everything exactly as it had been left 3 years ago, on whatever the last day was before the last day. Kale was standing in the middle of it, his back to her, looking at the console. He did not turn around. He knew she was there. "He was supposed to teach me how to use it," he said. Present tense. He said it in present tense, and he knew immediately that he had, because she heard it in his voice, the brief, sharp correction he didn't make, the decision to leave the tense wrong. Nadia stood in the doorway. She did not cross the threshold. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She did not say, "I know what loss feels like." She did not say any of the things people say that are true and useless and that make the person doing the saying feel better than the person hearing it. She said, "What kind of music?" He was quiet for a moment. What? What kind of music did he like? He turned around then, slowly, and looked at her like she had said something he had not expected. Not surprising in a bad way, just not what he had prepared for. "Embarrassing things," he said. "Big orchestral stuff." Film scores. Musicals. She raised an eyebrow. He cried at a musical in the theater once, Cale said. Told everyone the air conditioning was too cold. He paused. He was 28 years old, and 6'2". Nadia pressed her lips together, did not smile, or tried not to. That is not embarrassing, she said. That is good taste. Cale looked at her, and then something happened in his face that she had never seen before. Not the brief flicker of something she sometimes caught in him, not the almost amusement. This was the real thing. It crossed his face like a wave, quiet, and then suddenly very present, and he laughed. It was small. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. It had a quality to it of something that had not been used in a long time. A door opened that had been sealed, swinging on a hinge that was stiff from disuse. She smiled. She could not help it. The smile came without permission, and she did not try to stop it. They looked at each other in the unfinished studio, surrounded by 3 years of dust and half-built things, and a grief that was still very much present in the room, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Nadia straightened. She stepped back from the doorway. "I'll finish the upstairs rooms," she said. He nodded. Once. She went back down the corridor. Halfway to the bedroom she had left, she stopped walking, stood still for a moment, with her hand on the wall, breathed. Then she went back to work. The week she had agreed to ran out, and she was still there. She did not mark the day when it passed. Neither did he. The resignation letter, which she had left on the counter, and which he had set down without destroying, had at some point disappeared. She did not ask where it went. She assumed he had done something with it, filed it, moved it, and the assumption of its continued existence somewhere in the house was enough to make her feel like the ending of her time here was still available if she chose it, even if she was choosing day by day not to. Things changed in small ways. He started eating breakfast. Not formally, not at the table, not the covered plate she delivered, but she would come down in the mornings and find evidence that he had been in the kitchen while she was still upstairs. A cup used. The bread knife moved. The small satisfactions of a person who had started remembering that food was something you were allowed to want. He came to the kitchen some evenings while she was reading. He did not always stay. Sometimes he appeared in the doorway, looked at what she was reading, said nothing, got a glass of water, and left. But sometimes he sat at the other end of the table with his phone or a document he was reviewing, and they would spend an hour like that, in the quiet they had apparently both separately decided was acceptable. She returned the book with the broken spine. He did not put it back on the shelf. She saw it on the kitchen table one morning, face down on a different page than she had left it. She did not say anything about this. The east wing door was open more often now. Not always, but often enough that she stopped thinking of it as the locked door and started thinking of it as simply a door. She heard him in there sometimes. He was learning the console, she thought, teaching himself what his brother had meant to teach him. She could hear the sounds of someone feeling their way through an instrument they do not know yet, slow and uncertain, and occasionally, briefly, right. It was not her place to say anything about it. So she said nothing, but she left a cup of tea outside the east wing door one evening, the way she had always left his coffee there, and in the morning the cup was empty. She added it to the list of things neither of them mentioned. He asked her one evening if she wanted to hear something. He said it the way people say things they have been sitting with for a while, quietly, without looking directly at her, while they were both in the kitchen. It was a Friday. She had just made tea. "Hear what?" she said. "Something my brother left." He was very still, in the way that meant he was working hard at staying level. "Recordings. From the studio. I found them on a hard drive." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Simple as that." They went to the east wing. He pulled a chair from somewhere for her. There were no proper chairs yet. The studio was still unfinished, and she sat on an equipment case, and he sat on another one, with a laptop open in front of him. The laptop had a cracked hinge that made it lean slightly to one side, which seemed exactly right, somehow. Nothing about this was polished or prepared. He pressed play. The music that came out of the laptop speakers was big and slightly ridiculous and completely, utterly sincere. An orchestral arrangement of something she vaguely recognized. full of the kind of sweeping, dramatic feeling that polite people sometimes call overwrought, and that honest people call overwhelming in the best way. She watched Cale's face while it played. He was very still, but it was a different stillness than the one she had learned, not the closed, sealed stillness of a man managing himself. This was the stillness of someone who is listening to something that is reaching them. She could see the effort of holding it, and she looked away because it was not hers to watch. The song ended. Another one started. This one was even more embarrassing, and she loved it immediately. They sat in the unfinished studio on equipment cases and listened to 3 songs without speaking, and by the end of the third one, neither of them was pretending it was just music. When it stopped, she did not say anything for a moment. Then, he had excellent taste. Cale was quiet. He would be devastated to hear you say that. He was very committed to the bit about it being embarrassing. He sounds like someone who knew exactly how to love things and just needed a cover story, she said. Silence. Yes, Cale said. That's right. She looked at the laptop screen, the track listing, the folder titles in her brother's file organization. She did not look at Cale, but she was aware of him the way you are aware of weather, the quality of the air in a room when something is changing. I'm glad you found them, she said. He did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had something in it she had not heard before. It was not soft exactly. It was open, like the difference between a closed fist and an open hand. Same person, different decision. I didn't know how to look, he said. I didn't know how to be in this room. A pause. I still don't, really. But it's different now. She finally looked at him. He was looking at the console, not at her, and she could see the full shape of him in the low light of the studio. The jaw that carried its old injury, the eyes that were not closed the way they always used to be, the whole careful architecture of a person who had been so sealed for so long that she had almost believed it was structural, almost believed it was just who he was. It was not who he was. He was a man who had lost the person who made him remember how to be a person, and had spent 3 years in the house they had last been in together, and had developed the specific, efficient coldness of someone who has decided that not feeling is safer than the alternative. He was a man who had kept recording studio equipment in an unfinished room, and left the door locked and stood outside it in the dark, and talked to himself, and had still, after all of it, not been able to throw the hard drive away. He had not thrown the hard drive away. She thought about that, about what it takes to keep something, about the specific kind of hope required to hold on to something you are not ready to open, just in case the day comes when you are. The curse. She thought about it differently now. The staff said it like it was something happening to him. Bad luck, fate, the particular misfortune of a man who could not keep people close. They said it with that mix of affection and helplessness that people use when they have watched something long enough to stop believing it can change. But she had been in the house long enough now to understand what it actually was. It was not cruelty, it was vacancy. She had understood that early, but she had not yet understood the specific shape of it, the particular mechanism. He had given them nothing to hold on to. Not because he didn't have anything to give. She knew now that he did. She had seen it, the dry humor under the serious exterior, the way he had laughed in the studio, the way he had crouched on his own floor picking up a newspaper for her on her second day. There was plenty in him. It was not an empty room. It was a sealed one, and the women before her had tried, in different ways, to get through the seal. She did not blame them. Most people, when they encounter a locked door, knock. That is the reasonable response. You knock and you wait, and you hope that eventually someone will open it. But no one was coming to open it from the inside. He had sealed himself so completely, with such practiced efficiency, that knocking eventually just felt like knocking. Like something you could do forever and it would never change anything, and you would just wear your hands down. So they left. She had not knocked. She did not know if this was wisdom or stubbornness, or simply the practical reality of a person who had too much else to do to spend energy on knocking. But she had put his coffee outside the east wing door, and picked up the empty cup, and watched the corners in the hallways, and borrowed his book, and sat in the kitchen in the evenings, and said almost exactly the wrong thing about the window shades, and somehow, without knocking, she had just been there, consistently there. In the way that people are there when they are not trying to fix something, just doing their own work, in the same space, over and over. And the door had opened, not for her, not because of her. The door had opened because he had made a decision to open it, because something in him had decided it was time, because 3 years is a long time to stand in a hallway, and it was cold there, and the room on the other side had his brother's music in it. She had not broken the curse. The curse had simply run out. She did not sleep well that night. Not in a bad way, not the kind of not sleeping that comes from worry or from something going wrong. It was the other kind, the kind where your mind keeps running over the same ground, not because it is distressing, but because it has found something it wants to keep touching, like a new coin that you keep pulling out of your pocket just to feel the edges of it. She thought about the laugh, the small, brief, barely there laugh in the studio. She had been in the house for 2 months and some days, and she had never heard him laugh. She had seen it almost happen twice, the window shade argument, the kitchen table with the book, but it had never actually arrived before that moment in the studio, that 2-second crack in the facade where the real thing came through. It was embarrassing how much she had been sitting with it. She went down at 6, made the coffee, took his cup to the east wing door out of habit, set it on the floor, went back to start on the kitchen. He appeared at 6:10, which was earlier than usual. He had his phone in his hand, and he was already in the middle of something. She could tell from the particular set of his shoulders, the way he moved when his head was already somewhere else. He picked up the coffee without looking at it, which was what he always did, and then he stopped in the kitchen doorway on his way out. "The orange juice," he said. She looked up. "You've been leaving the orange juice out of the morning routine for 3 weeks. Since the event." She blinked. "You told me you didn't drink it." "I didn't. I don't." A pause. "I just noticed you stopped putting it out." She looked at him. He was looking at his phone again. "Should I put it back out?" she asked. "No," he said. "I just noticed." He left the kitchen. She stood there for a moment, holding a dishcloth. He had noticed. He had noticed 3 weeks ago, and he had not said anything, and then this morning, the morning after the studio, he had said it, not as a complaint or a correction, but as a fact, just a thing he was mentioning, the way you mention a thing to a person you have gotten used to talking to. She put the dishcloth down and went back to work. But there was something happening in her chest that she did not have a precise word for, a warmth that was not uncomfortable, just present, that she had learned to neither examine too closely nor push away. Adaize noticed everything. This was not a surprise. Adaize had been noticing things in that house for 4 years and had the particular quality of attention that domestic workers develop when they spend enough time in a space, a kind of peripheral, total awareness that takes in things that people in front of them never realize are being taken in. She did not say anything directly. She was too good at her job for that, too fond of Nadia, and too fond of Kale in the complicated way that you are fond of someone you have watched suffer without being able to do anything about it. What she did do was start leaving an extra cup on the kitchen table in the evenings. Not near Nadia's usual spot, at the other end, the end that Kale used when he came down. Nadia saw it on a Tuesday and said nothing. She filled both cups when she made her tea. She left the second one at the other end of the table and went to her reading. He came down at 9:30. He sat at his end. He picked up the cup that was already there, still warm, and he looked at it for a moment. And she turned a page in her book. "Did you make this?" he said. Adaize left out the extra cup. "I just filled it." "Ah." He drank his tea. She read her book. The clock ticked. At some point he said, "What are you reading?" "Different book," she said. "My own this time. You don't have to worry." "I wasn't worried. You were the smallest amount worried." A pause. Then, "It's a good library." "It's an excellent library," she agreed. "You should use it more." "I do use it. You use the business shelf and the 2 shelves on the left side. The rest is untouched." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you know which shelves I use?" "Dust distribution," she said simply. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in that family. A short exhale through the nose. The sound of someone who has been caught out by something and finds it, despite themselves, slightly funny. "I'll use more shelves," he said. "I'll believe it when I see it," she said. He went to bed an hour later. She sat in the kitchen for a little while after he left, not reading, just sitting in the quiet that the house had at this hour, the particular comfortable silence of a place that had settled for the night. She thought, "This is nice." Simple as that. Just, "This is nice." She called her mother on a Sunday afternoon, her one full day off, sitting on the low wall outside the estate's side gate in the thin winter sun. Her mother was brisk on the phone, the way she always was, not cold, just efficient, a woman who had used her energy so carefully for so long that phone calls had to be useful to justify themselves. "How is it?" her mother asked. "Fine," Nadia said. "Fine meaning difficult, or fine meaning you're managing. Fine meaning actually fine." A pause. "The man, what is he like?" Nadia thought about how to answer this. She thought about him crouching on the floor picking up newspaper. She thought about the open east wing door, the laptop with the cracked hinge, the empty teacup at the other end of the kitchen table. She thought about the word because, spoken in the garden at the charity event, in the dark and the noise, aimed directly at her. "Different than what I expected," she said. Her mother made a sound that meant go on. "When I came, they told me he was difficult, cold, that nobody could stay." She watched a car go past on the road below the gate, and I suppose those things were true, but they were true in a way that made sense when you saw it close up. "He's not cruel. He's just been in his own head for a very long time." "Have you seen that before?" her mother said, with the precision of a woman who knew the answer. Nadia thought about this. "Yes," she said. "And what did you do then?" "Went my own way and hoped they found theirs." "And now?" Now. She was still there. She had not gone her own way. She had stayed in the kitchen and left the coffee cup and moved the window shades back, and said, without entirely meaning to, there could be someone in that chair. "I don't know," she said honestly. Her mother was quiet. "Then, does he treat you right?" "Yes," Nadia said, without hesitation. "Does the work suit you?" "Yes." "Then stay as long as it makes sense to stay," her mother said. "And when it doesn't, leave. You've always known the difference." Nadia looked at the road for a while after they hung up. The sun was low and the air was cold, and the estate behind her was quiet on its Sunday afternoon. She had always known the difference. She was not sure, now, that she did, but she walked back through the gate anyway. She stayed. The resignation letter never came up again. She stopped thinking of herself as someone waiting to leave, and started thinking of herself as someone who was simply there, which was a different thing entirely, and the difference felt significant, even though she could not have explained it to anyone who asked. Things continued to change in the small, quiet ways that are not dramatic until you look back at them from a distance. He learned the console. She heard him in the East Wing on evenings and late afternoons, working through it the way you work through something hard. 2 steps, and then back, and then forward again, and gradually forward more than back. She did not ask him how it was going. He did not volunteer. But one morning he said, without context, in the kitchen while she was making coffee, "I found the tutorial files my brother made. He filmed himself going through each function." She looked up. He was looking at the window. "That sounds like him," she said, on the basis of nothing except what she had learned about who his brother was. Cale was quiet for a moment. "Yes. He left a note at the beginning of the first one that said he was making them because he didn't trust me to remember things verbally, and this way I couldn't say he hadn't explained it." She said nothing. She kept making coffee. "He was right," Cale added. "I would have said he hadn't explained it." She poured the coffee, turned around, and handed him his cup. He took it. "Thank you," he said, "for the coffee." She knew he meant the coffee, but it had the quality of a sentence that could mean more than one thing, and she let it mean both. The staff noticed the change without saying anything directly, which was its own kind of comment. Adaeze made food that required sitting down to eat, and left it on the kitchen table at 6:30, and Cale started eating it, and she stopped looking surprised that he did. Remy stopped having the particular quality of low-level alarm around the house that had been his baseline since before Nadia arrived. The house itself seemed to exhale slightly. the way houses do when the weather inside them shifts. She did not know what to call what was happening between herself and Cale. She did not have language for it that felt accurate. It was not romance, not in any conventional sense. There were no declarations, no moments designed for them to be moments. It was something quieter and, she thought, more real than that. It was the specific intimacy of two people who had been honest with each other without ever formally agreeing to be, who had developed a language of small things: the coffee cup, the compromise shade angle, the kitchen evenings, the studio, that said what they were not yet saying with actual words. She thought about this sometimes while she was working. She thought about whether it was enough, whether it was the beginning of something or the whole of it, whether she was building something or just inhabiting a moment that would eventually end. She did not have answers. She was 24 years old, and she had spent most of her life knowing exactly what she needed to do next, and doing it, and this was the first time in a long time that she did not know what was next and was not frightened by that. That, she thought, was probably its own kind of answer. The last thing she thought about, before she stopped thinking about the curse entirely, was the morning she arrived. The neighbor at the gate. They all leave. No one lasts longer than 2 months. She had walked through the gate anyway. She thought about the women before her, the assistants and the housekeeper, and the one he had dated, and she did not think of them as failures or as proof of something broken in him. She thought of them as people who had tried a thing and found it was not working, and had done what you do when a thing is not working, which is to stop doing it. That was not weakness. That was just how people are made. She had stayed not because she was stronger than them, or more patient, or because she had some particular gift for handling difficult men. She had stayed because she could not afford to leave, and then because the house had started to make sense to her, and then because leaving had started to feel like a loss she did not want. And somewhere in that sequence of practical, unglamorous reasons, something real had grown up through the cracks. The way things grow through cracks. Quietly and without asking permission. She was not going to describe it as breaking a curse. That was not what had happened. Curses are broken by people who come in prepared to break them, armed with the right thing, brave and intentional and pointed at the target. She had walked around the corner with a full tray and hit him like hitting a wall. She had fallen into his arms in the most literal sense possible, clumsy and embarrassed, and already mentally calculating whether she was about to be fired, and he had caught the coffee pot and then crouched on the floor beside her to pick up newspaper sections in a hallway that smelled like breakfast. And then she had gotten up and apologized and gotten on with it, and on with it, and on with it, until one day the door was open and the music was playing, and they were sitting on equipment cases in an unfinished room listening to the recordings of a young man who had loved film scores without apology, and the man beside her was quietly, irrevocably present in a way he had not been when she arrived. That was the whole story. No magic, no single turning point, no moment where everything crystallized into something clean and easy. Just a woman who needed the job, and a house that needed someone in it who was not trying to fix anything. Just a man who had been sealed for a long time, and a door he opened himself when he was finally ready. Just two people taking up space in the same rooms, over and over, until the rooms felt like somewhere they both belonged. She was still there. That was the ending. She was still there, and the east wing door was open, and the coffee cup was always empty when she came to collect it, and the kitchen light was on in the evenings, and somewhere in the unfinished studio, a brother's voice was on a hard drive explaining every function of the console he had built, methodically, so that the person he loved most could not say he hadn't explained it. She was still there, and that, in the end, was the only thing that had ever needed to be true.